Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis tonight. So we're starting over in the Middle East with the rising conflict between Israel and Hamas. And this headline coming out of the Jerusalem Post: Gazans discover a mass grave near Nasser Hospital. IDF denies involvement. According to reports, the grave contained at least 200 bodies. Gazans have reported discovering a mass grave with over 200 bodies on Monday near the Nasser Hospital in the city of Kahn Yunis in the Gaza Strip. The Qatari-based news outlet Al Jazeera published a report on the matter, claiming that Palestinian civil defense members and paramedics have retrieved, quote, 300 bodies buried in this mass grave by the Israeli military, unquote. The IDF has rejected these claims in an official statement in response to the reports, saying that they are baseless and unfounded. So joining me now to discuss is Zachary Yost, who is the host of the War, Economy, and State podcast. So, Zachary, what do we know about the reliability of this report that this mass grave was actually found? And this doesn't really look good if true for Israel.
Right. So things are still very unclear at this point. The reports just started coming out within the past few days, and now there's calls for inquiries and things like that. Obviously, it's in both sides' interests to try and spin the story to their benefit. And there's, of course, a long history of reports of atrocities not being true or being half true, things like that. What happened is, because the hospitals could not access cemeteries, they were burying people who died near to the hospital. And what happened was, when Israel took control of the area, they exhumed some of those bodies to test if any of them were hostages. The specific claim here is that some of these bodies, now that Israel has withdrawn from that area, Palestinians have come back. There's claims that some of these bodies they've found were basically just executed, that they, had their hands tied behind their back, things like that. We don't know any of that yet. There's not really a Western media presence. It's entirely possible that happened, but it would be a bit hasty to take one side or the other at this point, because we just don't know, and both sides have an incentive to spin it in their way.
Very political. And so, are there any reports that are suggesting that some of these bodies may be some of the hostages or potentially even American citizens, or do we not know any of those details either?
As the latest that I have seen is that Israel has not put forward any information about whether they found any bodies of hostages or how they checked them or anything like that. We do not know at this time.
So, assuming that this story can be verified and this mass grave is accurate in terms of the reports that are coming out, how, if at all, does this potentially change the United States' response to the funding and the foreign aid that's going to Israel, and this quote unquote humanitarian aid that's really going to Hamas is going to be signed by Biden? You and I had a conversation earlier, and I agree with you that I don't think there's any stopping that aid package yet, but the UN is very concerned about this report. And so, will the Biden administration likely change any of their position in terms of the foreign policy because of this story, or is this kind of just one detail that isn't going to ultimately really change anything on the world stage?
It's hard to imagine that Biden would make any dramatic shifts to pro-Israel policy. One thing that does seem entirely possible is there could be targeted sanctions against specific units within the Israeli military. That is currently happening right now. It's not been announced which unit, but in sort of the past week and a half or so, the administration has indicated they're going to be sanctioning a unit, which means they technically can't receive any, U.S. aid. That could be quite possible. It's very unclear at this point, but because of domestic political considerations alone here in the U.S., the idea that there'd be a major drop in U.S. support or aid is, I don't think, on the table.
And there have also been reports just in the recent days of a chief intelligence officer for the IDF that has resigned following the October 7th attacks. What do you make of that resignation and the timing of that decision with this story of this mass grave coming out?
Yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with this story. October 7th was an absolute disaster for Israel and an absolute complete failure by the Israeli military and intelligence community. I would say I'm more surprised that this person did not resign earlier. I'm surprised there's not been many more resignations or firings. Uh, when when Pearl Harbor happened, the U.S. commander was really put through the ringer. I mean, it was viewed as a huge failure, and he was punished for that. This is a huge failure. I would expect to see much more recriminations potentially in the future once the conflict has settled down, whether that's later this year or into next year. The Israelis will demand accountability once the situation has stabilized, I expect.
And speaking of the timing of this conflict potentially stabilizing, I mean, obviously, Israel was attacked, and they have the right to respond. But in terms of this ongoing conflict, now that the United States is funding basically both sides of this conflict, can we anticipate potentially that this is going to settle down anytime soon, or what are the more long-term projections?
I am skeptical that the conflict will settle down, although anything is possible. For one thing, Israel, as we discussed earlier, is losing a lot of support in the United States, especially among young people. Even among Republicans, support is very low, below 30%. So that incentivizes Israel to try and take care of business now, I would say, while it has the military and diplomatic support of the US. They might consider launching an offensive against Hezbollah to try and clean up their northern border in Lebanon. They even could potentially consider escalating the conflict with Iran once things have calmed down in Gaza. We don't know. It's all speculation on my part. There's domestic political
Mhm.
considerations in Israel to consider. I doubt things will be
And we got to
quieting
leave it
down.
there. Zach, really appreciate your insights. We'll continue to follow this story, and we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path, and now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce, 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. Well, as the conflict in the Middle East continues to rage on, here on the home front, we are seeing a decrease among younger voters that are conservatives or Republicans and even independent that tend to lean Republican for a pro Israel foreign policy message. That in the wake of the pro Palestinian and really anti Semitic protests that are going on college campuses around the country. This headline from National Review regarding Columbia. Columbia shifts to hybrid learning for the remainder of the semester as anti Israel protests continue. Columbia University announced Tuesday that it is shifting to hybrid learning for the remainder of the semester as anti Israel protests continue to disrupt campus life. The Medical Center and Manhattanville campuses will remain in person. All faculty and staff who wish to work from home are able to do so, while those who want to attend class in person can do so as well. So joining me now is Marc Lotter, who's the Chief Communications Officer for the America First Policy Institute. So, Marc, I think that this is showing the younger voting demographic where they're really situated in terms of a perspective on foreign policy. What do you make of these protests and how the universities are handling it?
Well, they're mishandling it to begin with. I mean, you have a responsibility to make sure that every student has access to education, has access to their facilities. And it doesn't matter their race, their religion, their politics, or what they feel about the Israel-Hamas war. But the fact that you're allowing these woke leftists, pro-terrorists, to shut down their universities, to stop in-person learning, it's just an embarrassment. And I think it's got to be noted. Two things. Number one, these protesters aren't wearing MAGA hats. These are the Democrat Party of today. The Democrat Party of today has turned its back on Israel. It is now openly pro-terrorist, and it should make everyone, especially those who are Jewish, think, why on earth would you ever vote for a Democrat again?
Yeah, on a number of different levels, but certainly this one as well. So there is a big opportunity for Republicans, not just Donald Trump, but all the way down ticket and even state and local races to really harness that messaging that you're providing, Marc. Are we really seeing, though, Republicans do that effectively?
Well, I think we are. We're seeing in so many states where they're pushing back against the divestment proposals that were floating around a few years ago. We're also seeing many states that are stepping up to put an end to the DEI, diversity, inclusion, equity, inclusion nonsense to rest. And so I think you're seeing a lot of leadership there. And then, of course, at the national level, it just has to be made clear over and over again who sides with Israel, who sides with the terrorists. I mean, I don't recall America being accused of genocide when we responded post 9/11. I don't remember America being accused of genocide after we responded to the attacks of Pearl Harbor. Israel was attacked by terrorists, and the best kind of terrorist is a dead terrorist. And I think we can never forget that. And imagine, Jenna, for a moment, take out Palestine and Israel. What if this was a protest against black students attending class, or women attending school, or boys participating in women's sports, or something involving the LGBTQ, whatever all the letters mean? What if it was one of those issues? You know the Justice Department would be there instantly. They would be yanking federal funding. There would be congressional howls and calls for January 6th level of investigations of who's funding this group, who's behind this group. But because it involves Israel, nothing.
Yeah, and it really just shows the utter viewpoint discrimination that the left and those in office that are Democrats and their organizations, the three-letter agencies, really don't care when it comes to viewpoints that they happen to agree with politically, and yet I don't see a lot of support from the Republican side, at least on the federal level from Congress, talking as much, other than the Freedom Caucus members, but generally from the Republicans about support for Israel, as much as we see support for Ukraine funding. And that just goes into the last Pew Research that poll that showed that more millennials and younger that are conservatives are voicing less support for Israel because they have this message that because we're America first, that funding any a foreign nation is at the expense of American priorities. And while we can talk certainly about funding the border, and I'm personally disappointed in Speaker Johnson for not holding Democrats to saying, okay, if you want all of this foreign aid, regardless of where it's going, we got to add a border security bill. But at the same time, it seems like the younger generation, Mark, is missing the point that Israel is not only our ally, but there is a bigger theological message as well that traditionally has been held by evangelicals, which are a huge voting bloc as to why we should support Israel in general from a blessings to America standpoint. And that's being missed. So overall here, how do you view this from the voting perspective and also from a lack of border security in the funding and the pro-Israel message from Republicans?
Well, when it comes to Israel, I think there's never been any question that the Republican Party, almost up and down the line, supports funding for Israel. That was never in question. But what you had were the folks who were insisting on Ukraine funding, knowing that that was the only way you were going to get it through Congress. Standalone Israel funding would have sailed through the moment that it hit the floor. But the problem was they couldn't get Ukraine through. So both Democrats and Republicans knew the only way to get Ukraine funding was to tie it to Israel funding. And that's what slowed the whole thing down. But when it comes to the younger folks, the one thing I would tell you, and we said this repeatedly when I was in the White House and during the 2020 campaign, America first does not mean America alone. It does not mean that we are still not the lone superpower in the world. The question is, how do we use it? When do we use it? And do we make sure that American interests always come first? And in that case, standing with Israel is always one of our highest priorities, especially after the horrific, demonic attacks by the Hamas terrorists.
Really well said. America first doesn't mean America alone. And so just in the last minute I have with you, Marc Lotter, what about the lack of border security Speaker Johnson didn't bring to the floor, along with the foreign aid package that included the funding to Ukraine?
Look, no one, everybody believes that we have to have stronger border security. We need real border security, but it doesn't really matter what bill got passed or didn't get passed. Joe Biden wasn't going to enforce it anyway. He already has the power he needs to enforce border security. All he has to do is go back and undo the 94 executive orders he issued in the first 100 days, which basically undid the Trump policies. So even if they passed a strong border security bill, Joe Biden wasn't going to enforce it. Alejandro Mayorkas wasn't going to enforce it. They weren't going to spend on it. All they were going to do was take the money and use it to process more people into this country rather than keeping them out. So if we truly
well
want
said.
border
And we got to leave
security,
it there,
and I think
Marc Lotter. Really appreciate it. We'll be right back. Well, friends, you might have heard that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, so they want to pass along the savings directly to you by having a $25 extravaganza. I love that word, extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products, some you may not even know about. To get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use My Pillows are just $25. My Pillow sandals, also awesome, only $25. Their 6-pack towel sets are $25. And brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. For the first time ever, the premium My Pillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. And orders over $75 will receive free shipping too. This amazing offer won't last long. Go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, or call 800-564-8475 today. That's 800-564-8475, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Jenna. Turning now to all of the Trump legal drama this week, we'll welcome in our legal eagles. And our legal eagles today that are joining us is Rob Patillo, who is a Democrat strategist and lawyer, and David Frei, who is a podcaster on Rumble and also recovering attorney. So, gentlemen, welcome. And Rob, let's start with you since you're the Democrat on the panel. Do you agree with this prosecution of Trump in New York, or do you think he's even going to get a fair trial?
I think he's absolutely going to get a fair trial. I think that we have to allow the rule of law to take us where it be, as opposed to putting political implications on every prosecution. I'm seeing this now trickle its way down to regular everyday cases where people are now claiming that every case brought against them is a political persecution, that it is unfair, that is unjust. People are trumpeting or parroting these exact same things. And once we start bringing these questions in and questioning our criminal justice system, we don't have much left as a democracy. So I think that we have to, as opposed to attacking the criminal justice system, simply assert that I'm not guilty of the charges. I believe they'll be proven at trial, and I have faith in our justice system to exonerate me. I think that should be the statement of the defense team, and then move forward from there.
Well, David, I mean, I think you and I would take issue with that because if you don't have due process to begin with, and the rule of law really should have barred, in my opinion, these charges even from being brought. I mean, the DOJ initially declined to prosecute, and now this is kind of a reinvention of the statute. We don't have a justice system if everything is stacked against the defendant. I mean, that's why we have constitutional protections in this country. So, what do you think is actually happening here in terms of Trump's lawyer's ability to even put on a reasonable defense that a jury might buy?
I never thought I'd actually run into a real human who thinks that this is anything but an abuse of the process, political persecution. It's mind-blowing to suggest that this is not weaponized, that he has a chance of getting a fair trial in New York. We have seen the wholesale weaponization of the legal system, the prosecutorial system. We've seen bias from judges that it's not just undeniable, it's almost in your face. They're proud of it. And to suggest all he has to do is assert his innocence in the face of charges that should have never been brought in a jurisdiction where you will never get a fair trial, and we're seeing it in real time. If people are questioning the legal system, it's not that's not the problem. That's the result of the problem. The result of the problem being wholesale weaponization, abuse of the process to go after your political rivals and to not even look into your political allies. I'll give you credit for actually thinking that this is a fair process.
Rob, your response?
Well, to that point, then where exactly does that take us as a constitutional republic? If everyone simply says that it's a witch hunt against me, that I can't be tried in this jurisdiction because these people are biased against me, I can't get a fair trial here. It means their entire constitutional system falls apart. So what are we going to switch to? Are we going to go to trial by combat after this? Are we going to go back to the Star Chamber? I think that once we start bringing in these outside voices, instead of simply saying that we are asserting our guilt or we're asserting our innocence at trial, and that we're going to work our way through the system, is that then everyone gets that exact same right. Everyone has the ability to question the system. And once our constitutional republic falls apart, I'm not quite sure what we're going to replace it with.
I think it already has started falling apart, and it is a star chamber. But go ahead, David.
It's not falling apart. It's being torn apart at the seams by corrupt, politicized prosecutors like Attorney General Letitia James, like Alvin Bragg. It's not falling apart as some passive thing. The Democrat system, the Democrat machine is tearing it apart at the seams. And if you don't see that, that is part of the problem, because you are protecting the party instead of attacking the party and criticizing it where they deserve to be criticized. Letitia James campaigns off prosecuting an individual, gets elected and prosecutes an individual. That's not the system falling apart. That is the Democrat machine pulling it apart, turning it into a kangaroo court system, a banana republic in real time. So you can't just sit there passively and saying it's happening. They're doing it.
But look, every single election cycle, we see district attorneys running on, I'm going to be a tough on crime district attorney. I'm going to prosecute the gangs. I'm going to stop carjackings. And then when they get in office, then they go after the gangs, they go after the carjackers, they go after the other criminals because they said they were going to do so during the campaign. Those people can't go to court and say, well, they campaigned on saying they were going to get rid of the gangs. I'm in a gang, so therefore this is a political persecution. This is what happens when you start pulling the strings of our system apart. Go back to what John Jay said in the Federalist Papers. He talks about the fact that the institutional legitimacy of our judicial system, the one thing that sets us apart from colonial Europe, and we want to continue this great American experiment, it means that we reinforce and we support our justice system, not that we bend it to whatever is convenient for any individual defendant.
Robert, I mean, those are nice platitudes, but you understand the difference between saying I'm going to be tough on crime versus I'm going to be tough on Trump. There's a difference between saying I'm going to go after gangs and I'm going to go after Mr. X or Mr. Smith. Letitia James campaigned off prosecuting Trump, not crime, Trump, calling him an illegitimate president, saying that he was taking foreign money laundering. And when she couldn't find that theory of the case, then she has to go to fraudulent overvaluation of assets. They didn't say we're going to be tough on crime. They said we're going to go after Trump because he's an illegitimate president. And they weaponized every aspect of state powers to go after the duly elected president to prevent him from getting elected a second time.
Sorry, you guys are making my job easier, but go ahead, Rob.
Look, you can make the same argument in the Bill Cosby case, where they a very similar set of facts, where you're talking about a case that was was long past the statute of limitations, that everyone thought had been dismissed, that was not going to come back again. You could get a new prosecutor who campaigns on, I'm going to get Bill Cosby. They get in office, they find a theory of the case to get Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby goes to trial, he's convicted and goes to jail. This is not, it's something individualized to President Trump. We see this happening in America often in high-profile cases, and in reality, I wish that the litigants would just simply stick to the facts of the case and say, look, no, I did not pay $130,000 to a porn star. No, I did not use campaign money to do so. No, I did not coordinate with the owner of the National Enquirer and my attorney to create a conspiracy to do this around the election. The absolute solution to all this is just innocence. Just say I'm innocent and move on. You don't have to spin this broad-based conspiracy.
But Rob, I mean, in a weaponized judicial process, the mere fact of asserting your innocence and lack of due process isn't sufficient. And I think that that's David's point. But we only have about 45 seconds left in this segment. So David, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, it's a very Nancy Pelosi. You'll be able to prove your innocence at trial. That's when the system's been flipped upside down already. And this idea, he can assert his innocence. You are pulling the Lavrenta Barria, find me the man, I'll show you the crime, and just say, well, just prove that you're innocent. It's like the witch. If she floats after you kill her, I guess she was innocent.
Yeah, well said. And, but I think this is a very important debate because for a lot of MAGA conservatives in particular, they don't think that Democrats like Rob Patillo exist. And so I'm really happy that both of you came back on to debate these issues. We'll be right back with more of our Legal Eagle panel right after this. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path, and now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. And we're back with our Legal Eagles, Rob Patillo and David Frei. And, a lot of disagreement between you two, and you're making my job really easy to not even have to moderate, just going back and forth. And I wish we had even more time on the Trump New York case. But let's switch over to the arguments that are set for tomorrow morning in the presidential immunity case. David, what do you think that the Supreme Court should hold in this case?
I think the Supreme Court should, bear in mind, I'm a former Quebec attorney. I got no expertise in constitutional law, except what I've learned over the last 8 years of doing this. The Supreme Court has to come in with a very robust presidential immunity finding in this. And robust, maybe more robust than people even feel comfortable with. Because if you leave open the window and say, we're going to cover certain acts conducted as a president, but not others, all that you're going to end up having is the exact same type of state prosecution of a presidential candidate by circumventing the legal presidential immunity. The bottom line, I believe that the court should come down and say, unless you have been convicted, impeached and convicted, a state cannot come after you for a crime after you leave office. Period. Full stop. People don't like the he could get away with murder analogy, as if Obama didn't literally get away with murdering citizens through extrajudicial drone strikes. If you don't like that, then you convict on impeachment. And unless you can do that, you can't then go and harass a former president with state proceedings because you didn't like them, or to extort them, or to ensure that they do your bidding while they're in office.
Rob, what do you think?
I feel like we exist in almost like a different multiverse on these things, because I don't see how the Supreme Court could come back down in favor of presidential immunity. It will create a completely new class of individual in American society, which would be an individual who is literally above the law. Something that our founding fathers never intended to take place, something that was explicitly written about by both Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, across the board, about not having presidents or leaders who are above the law. It would change it from a constitutional system to a monarchy, essentially. That any time that a president can keep the other party from having the 2/3 majority to convict him in the United States Senate, he essentially can do whatever he wants to do, and there's absolutely no penalty at law for that. That is something that's never been contemplated by our government. That's a new level of power, and as somebody who considers himself a governmental conservative and is afraid of expanding the powers of our federal government, creating a position within government to say that if you get elected to this position, no law applies to you as long as you have a majority in the Senate, I think that's something that most Americans would be uncomfortable with.
Well, so gentlemen, here's
we
my
might live in
perspective. Well, go ahead, David. Yeah, you can respond to that.
No,
Go ahead.
we might live in two different universes. One is fact and constitution based, and the other one is political vendetta based. No one is above the law, true, but nobody's the president, and the president has specific provisions in a constitution that give him executive powers that no other citizen gets. So he's not above the law. He's subject to a different law. And one of those laws is embedded in the Constitution. You don't get to harass a president unless you have successfully impeached and convicted. And the reason for that is very logical, because otherwise you will have your rogue state attorneys, district attorneys, attorney generals, Letitia James, Fannie Willis, who will go after a president if they don't like his policy, like Letitia James is doing, or who will extort him in real time. So this whole nobody's above the law, you're right. It just so happens that the president is subjected to a different law than every other citizen. And there's a damn good reason that the I want to say the forefathers, but not the forefathers, the founding fathers thought of when they were drafting that Constitution. So he's not above the law. He's just subject to different laws that are not being applied to him right now.
The issue that, go ahead, Jenna, sorry.
Yeah, no, and I just want to say I actually agree with both of you, but in a different way, because my take on this is that we do have to, as David says, have a robust presidential immunity, because you don't want weaponized prosecutions after the fact. And I think the DC Circuit got it wrong when they said that immunity lapses after office. That just doesn't make sense rationally. But if we also hold to what Trump's attorneys are suggesting, that impeachment and conviction is the only standard, and then the president can do literally whatever he wants under color of his office, there has to be a distinction between official acts versus personal or private acts. And we learned that even with Clinton versus Jones, that there was a civil case while Clinton was a sitting president. And obviously those acts occurred before he became the president, but he was still subject to civil law. And so in terms of criminal prosecution, I think that the Supreme Court needs to have a robust presidential immunity that carries all the way through. There's no lapse, but it has to cover only official acts, not other things that he may have, for example, as a candidate for reelection. So, Rob, what do you think of maybe that equal or that middle ground?
I think we're getting close. We can get closer to a compromise on something along those lines. Well, I think this idea of having a full across-the-board immunity for a president, so long as he's not impeached. Let's say that the president decides to rent a fleet of 18-wheelers, pull them up to Fort Knox, empty out the national treasury, take it to a undisclosed location, and you spend it for his own means. Under this rubric, there'd be absolutely nothing that we could do about it. Let's say that the president decides to just take the U.S. atomic bomb stockpile and just take them down to Mar-a-Lago and just use them for his own purposes. Well, there ain't no damn thing you can do with it as long as you don't have the votes in the Senate. I think it takes us to a place of absurdity. And the fact that we've been able to make it from 1787 till 2024 without this coming up shows that maybe it's not so much that this is a flaw within the system, but that we're trying to carve out a niche niche exception for the individual. And I'm not quite sure how you would stop this from sort of across the board immunity from turning into all out autocracy, all out fascism, all out having a single individual who can just simply ignore the 27th Amendment and just stay in office as long as they feel like, because why bother leaving if nothing applies to me? I mean,
Well,
you
we
get
already
to a
have
point of
legislative
absurdity in
immunity that
this.
has bright line standards, and so we need to apply that as well to executive immunity. But go ahead, David.
I know. I was going to say, if you are living in a world where the president could take out nuclear weapons and bring them to Mar-a-Lago and not get convicted by the Senate, you don't have a country that's left anymore to begin with. If you can have a president who's stealing from the Treasury and not getting convicted, you don't on impeachment, you don't have a country left anymore. So that's the response to that. There were broad executive privileges granted to the president specifically. I do appreciate that one might want to carve out a purely personal act exception. I can understand that. The only problem then is you're going to say, well, you're going to have what's her face? Alvin Bragg is going to say, well, when he paid the hush money, even though the feds decided not to prosecute that, forget that. That was purely personal. That had nothing to do with anything related to the presidency. What you're going to have is people not even weaponizing it, but rather bastardizing the purely personal act. And they'll say everything that we don't agree with was now a purely personal act. So I think it needs to be robust. I could understand a carve out for purely personal acts, but to Rob's hypothetical, if the president is running around murdering people in the White House and not getting convicted by the Senate, your country has fallen already, and you don't need to worry about whether or not that president goes to jail.
This is
Well,
pretty much exactly what we had with Alejandro Mayorkas and his own party just dismissing the impeachment against him and not holding him accountable. So I'm left wondering, do we still have a constitutional republic? But gentlemen, thanks so much. We're already out of time. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, there's a lot more that could be said on the legal issues and the debate that we just had regarding the Trump drama. But let's talk about the political fallout. And Marc Lotter, who is the Chief Communications Officer at the America First Policy Institute, rejoins me now. So, Marc, thanks so much. And, let's talk about the court of public opinion and how all of this, between the Supreme Court case that they're hearing on the question of presidential immunity tomorrow and the New York case, and whether or not Trump is going to spend the vast majority of the campaign in the defendant's chair, how this actually plays heading into November.
I actually don't think it's going to make much of a difference, because I think for most Americans out there, whether Trump is facing charges, Biden and his family should face charges, the end of the day, folks are going to be voting on who's going to lower my gas prices, who's going to lower grocery prices, secure the border, deal with a world that is spinning out of control under the malfeasance of Joe Biden. I think these are the things that will motivate it. The rest of this is great political fodder, and it's nonsense for the DC chattering elite. But I don't think the average American, they vote what's in their best interests, and they know one side is actually trying to do things about the issues they matter. The other side is telling you that you're an idiot for thinking it's a problem.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people who are seeing all of this happening to Donald Trump, and they're kind of viewing this as just a more or less political drama, really are concerned more about the economy. They're concerned about border security. I mean, these are the number one issues out of exit polls, and they're seeing the failures of Joe Biden and his administration. So this begs the question, Marc, I mean, are a lot of these cases like the Alvin Bragg, that I don't think has any sort of legal a valid premise to begin with. Is this just a maneuver to drain the resources from the campaign? Because there was a Politico article just this week talking about since 2023, the Trump campaign and the PAC, Save America, has spent about $59 million on legal fees. I mean, that all is more than Joe Biden has spent on his entire campaign so far.
Yeah, that's their entire plan. They know they can't beat him at the ballot box with Joe Biden's record. So the only thing they can do is try to weaponize the government against him and try to beat him in court. And it's really backfiring. I mean, when the average person sits out there and thinks, hold on a minute. So Donald Trump could be thrown into Rikers Island jail for going to his son's high school graduation, but Biden illegal immigrants can beat up NYPD officers, be released from jail without bond, and on the taxpayer dime, travel around the country anywhere they want to. I mean, that right there explains the weaponization of government on its face. But their entire goal is to tie him up with all of these cases, keep him off the campaign trail, lock him in New York City for 4 days a week, put a gag order on him so they can try to keep him quiet and do anything they can to prop up Joe Biden's campaign. It's just not working because people, every time they go into the grocery store, go by the gas station, that is Joe Biden's campaign, and it's an ad for Donald Trump.
Yeah, really well said. And I mean, I was just speaking to a friend yesterday who, describes himself not as, Republican or a Democrat, is independent, not really political at all, and was literally expressing to me, like, I don't care about any of this, drama that's going on in court, but groceries are over double the price. And even here in Florida, gas is almost $4 a gallon. And, you can see some of those effects in your pocketbook. And he was even saying, I mean, my life was better off under Donald Trump. And he's like, I really don't care for, all of the rhetoric, but I just don't have to look on social media, and I want to live my life in the best way possible, have more money for my family. And I mean, this was literally, I think, a poster message of exactly why Joe Biden's campaign is failing. And yet some of the polls are indicating that Biden is somehow up on Donald Trump. Is this just because there are enough blue states and ridiculous Democrats that are refusing to vote their own interests merely because they hate Donald Trump?
Well, the one thing I would say is remember the polls are always wrong. I go back, I look at the final Real Clear Politics average going into 2020. It had Joe Biden winning by 7.5 percentage points. The actual margin was about 4 percentage points when it was done. But here's the thing to remember. The Real Clear Politics average today shows Donald Trump still winning the national vote by about a percentage point. It shows him winning in 6 of the 7 key swing states. None of those things were true at all during 2019 or 2020, even before COVID. So he is up right now. I think it's because the American people are voting with their pocketbooks. And I think your friend, the Independent, pretty much sums up what I've seen so many times. I've seen it on T-shirts and bumper stickers, like, I'll take a mean tweet for $2 a gallon gas again. I mean, it's just not that big of a
Yeah.
deal.
Right, right. And people can ignore, I mean, they don't have to watch all of the hysteria that's on CNN and MSNBC and the ladies of the View. I mean, they can just decide to not participate in that sort of rhetoric. But in the last minutes I have with you, Marc Lotter, let's talk about the RFK Jr. factor, because there's also another piece in Politico suggesting that Republicans are actually starting to get concerned. I don't think that RFK is actually as much of a threat just because of his vice presidential pick and some of the ways that he's gone far left in his campaign, rather than being kind of the centrist moderate candidate that could have culled some of the Republican votes if they didn't want to, maybe, let's say, go along with the quote unquote MAGA extremism that the Democrat left is trying to paint the Trump campaign as.
Yeah, well, I don't really put a lot of stock in all of these multi-candidate polls this far out, because as we get closer to the election, traditional conservatives will come back home and vote for the nominee. And I believe some traditional Democrats will go back and be done with their disgust of Joe Biden and go back to his. But the problem is that Joe Biden has fewer votes to lose. Every vote that Joe Biden loses, whether it's to RFK, whether it's to West, whether it's to Jill Stein, is a problem for Joe Biden. Go back to 2016, there were multiple candidates on the ballot. 2020, there weren't. It was just head to head. Now we see that having multiple candidates on the ballot is a real problem for Joe Biden, especially with that woke progressive left flank that's out there rioting in college campuses right now. I don't think they're coming back to Joe Biden. They'll go to a Jill Stein. They'll go to a West. Don't think they'll go to RFK. But every one of those that votes somewhere else, that's a problem for Uncle Joe.
Yeah, for sure. And just 30 seconds left. Do you think there are going to be presidential debates?
Unless Joe Biden is winning or losing significantly or tied, no. He can't be seen next to Donald Trump. The only way he does that is as a Hail Mary, because he's got nothing left to lose.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that he wouldn't respect the American people enough to get on a debate stage in the general election. Marc Lotter, really appreciate it. That's all the time we have here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. I will see you tomorrow night, and you can always go to salemnews.com for the replay.